our first topic today is some major leaks for the new Nintendo console.
Yes.
Right. Now, we knew from Investor Day calls and some of the stockholder stuff that we were getting a new console for Nintendo next year.
Yep.
And it's about time.
It is.
The Switch
it really
is getting a little long in the tooth. But some details about it have leaked out. You want to pick it up from here, John?
Well, the biggest things that we kind of know right now, or at least that we're hearing rumors about, are the potential dev kits being in hands. And I think that's something that we heard about a little while ago, but as we move closer and closer to the date, I think we can kind of confirm that from the outside with the investor call, with the date that they're targeting, with knowing that, any major game is going to take a little while to run up. I know we have some devs in chat right now. I feel like that is a very true rumor. But it also is kind of a big jump, knowing that hardware might be on the horizon. They're pushing another bundle at the end of the year, I think, to get, they're doing the Mario Kart and the Animal Crossing bundle at the end of the year. I think this is the final push for the Switch. I think that we are going to move into a new era of hardware. And I think that what we have seen, especially with the investor calls, the leaks, the various other things, I think that's pretty true. I think we're getting close.
So the leaked rumors is that this one is going to be as powerful as the PS5.
Yes, it could. The specific wording that I read was that it is powerful enough to play the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is an interesting thing to say, at 60 frames a second. And so those two things are very interesting to hear, thinking about the hardware in general.
I would like to see them. Will it be as ugly as the PS5?
I hope so. I hope it is heinous. I hope we can put that next to all the other heinous objects that are on the shelf. Say, Lynn, welcome on in. How you doing today? Thanks for being here. But maybe not. Fingers crossed.
So not a handheld thing. That's not really clear based on the leaks that I've seen.
Yeah, so I would assume we're going to continue to go with the handheld generation. I think that tablets and stuff have gotten strong enough, especially with the new releases and chips. Hopefully we're going to see something that can be portable, but also as strong as, say, newer phones.
Or like a Steam Deck.
Yeah, like a Steam Deck. Even because knowing what they can pack into the hardware now pack into the little container now is pretty good.
So chat's asking, how do you fit a PS5 into a handheld? And that actually brings me to another interesting thing about the leaks that I saw in the article I was reading this morning. One, it's going to have a new cartridge type. Right?
Yep.
And the fact that they said cartridge sparked something in me. And you and I were talking about this a little bit in the pre-show.
Yeah.
So one of the things that they used to do in the Super Nintendo era, as the Super Nintendo started getting kind of longer in the tooth and started running into hardware limitations, is the nice thing about cartridges as opposed to CDs is they could add computing power. They could add oomph to the game by putting chips and other stuff like GPU increases and stuff like that into
the hardware cartridge.
The cartridge itself.
Yeah.
So when you plugged it in, it was getting its power and it did everything it needed to do. And I wonder if the idea of going back to a cartridge, right, is built around this idea of longevity for the hardware and really being able to get more out of the hardware itself, because you're not putting the entire load of running the game on the actual console.
Did they call the current Switch generation of chips? Did they call them? Why is my brain blanking on this?
Cartridges?
Right now? Cartridges. Yeah.
I'm gonna look that up for Nintendo Switch cartridges. Cards. What is the official name? A game card.
A game card. Interesting. Okay, so the fact that they're calling this a cartridge and not another game card.
Again,
my brain goes to backwards compatibility. That's the one thing that I'm wondering about this. If they're still sticking with the cartridge format and we're going to have a slot, are we going to see their normal handheld progression where you could play the games on the newer hardware, like the older stuff, like we talked about the Game Boy Advanced on the newer Game Boys?
And I stick to what I said when we were talking about this in the pre-show. if it is not backwards compatible, again, the amount of real estate in the system that you need to do to have that little chip slot for the game card is minimal, right? Like
it's the emulation on the hardware that we were talking about that might be the
and
tricky
again,
part.
it may be the same software running under the hood on a new hardware platform, and they're fine. People are saying they've already done dual slot in the DS generations. Yeah, and pretty easy to support the Switch form factor, which again, I think if it's not backwards compatible, I think it really hamstrings this console.
And they have said, which, you know, this is, take this insight however you want, they have said that they are going to bring over the old Nintendo accounts that you made on the Switch to the new hardware. So unless that changes, that tells me that they might have that. They might be expecting people to want that backwards compatibility. Because as we talked about too, if this new console has backwards compatibility and you have your old console laying around, you're an early adopter, you go buy the new console, that's just another Switch console that, you know, you hand off to somebody else, and now you've got 4 controllers and 2 Switches in the house and like yada, 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 you know.
You're firmly in that Nintendo ecosystem.
You're firmly in the Nintendo ecosystem, and you don't have to go somewhere for your more powerful console anymore. You've got your handheld portable, and then hopefully still handheld more powerful console that if you wanted to, you could take with you.
Well, then I think about the competitive scene and stuff like that. It also means that you can get your competitive scene and all these other people onto the new console quickly, right? Because like if Smash Brothers Ultimate is not backwards compatible in the new system, that competitive scene is going to stay with the Switch.
Yeah.
Until they come out with a new Smash Brothers.
Well, we've seen it as we've seen what happened with Melee.
Yeah.
Melee plays Melee to this day.
Yep, and they are on the GameCube. Whereas if you want them to convert over to that new console, and it is just a super powerful handheld, you need to have something for that chip.
Well, and hardware. So like hardware is going to be the next big question, right? Like, will my controllers, for example, be compatible with this next generation of hardware? Will will we have backwards compatibility from the chip slot? Will there be these subtle little things that like a lot of people aren't thinking about right now? Because I think if you own a Switch and you've had it for a while, you've probably bought a couple peripherals. You may have even bought a handful of other controllers.
Yeah, I have a Switch Pro controller at home.
Yeah, so like, will that stuff be compatible with next-gen hardware? Because that would also just be another huge win for them as compared to most everybody else.
Yeah. Chad's saying, be interested to see what bus they use for the cartridges to allow for expansion via cartridges, which we were talking about a few minutes ago. We might see an eSATA connection or something. Could be. What other series has a game that people clung to with this dedication?
Because Saitlin, you make a good point. So Saitlin is pretty well versed in the fighting scene area, or fighting game, scene, and I think that's a good point because Melee is a bit of an odd duck. Where like, when I say Melee players just play Melee, that is the game, that is the hill they live and die on. And so it is a bit of an odd duck because a lot of people will generationally move, like Street Fighter players, Mortal Kombat players. You don't see them playing a lot of, unless there was a bad iteration, you don't see them going back often. Melee is Melee. So what other series has a game that people clung to with this dedication?
Let me think about that for a second. That's actually a tough question.
I feel like there's a low-hanging fruit here that I'm missing.
I think so too. Again, I think about our Ultimate players. Like, those are the ones that I'm thinking of. And if Nintendo doesn't want to put pressure on themselves to have a crazy launch release, like, set of games, right? Because that's hurt them in the past, right? They need a killer app at launch, right?
And it won't be a new Smash because Sakurai has already said we don't know what's happening with Smash right now. He put out a video that said he would love to see somebody take up the mantle, but he doesn't think anybody can.
Right.
Which tells me right now, because he's pretty open when he's developing it, I don't think we got a new Smash on the horizon.
No.
And so what is going to be a flagship title that people have that level of dedication to?
And I think that, especially with say take something like Tears of the Kingdom, like we were talking about in the pre-show. If you make it fully backwards compatible, right, and you make it fully backwards compatible, you don't need a slew of games because now you've got Tears of the Kingdom running properly.
Exactly. Yes.
Right? You've got it on a new system, and I think a lot of people will either pick up Tears of the Kingdom or will revisit Tears of the Kingdom on a new console when Nintendo goes, this thing is 5 times as powerful as the Switch is. right?
No more lag.
No more lag, no more
pop
frame
in,
rates,
whatever
no
that
more-
looks like.
No more issues. And by the way, here's a DLC like expansion.
So they said yesterday they are not doing Tears of the Kingdom DLC.
They're not.
100% are not doing it.
Okay.
So that has also gotten a lot of people to speculate that the new generation of hardware may be coming out soon, because if they're not working on DLC, and the director said they're not doing it 100%, that means there's something that they are working on. So if they're not working on the DLC for Legend of Zelda right now, what are they working on?
They've got to be working on a new Zelda title.
Something.
When's the last time we got a good Metroid title?
I mean, okay, so Dread. Dread was genuinely a good title.
Okay. When did that come out?
Last year before. It was recent. Will we see Prime finally? The actual new Prime we've been promised for like a generation at this point.
On a new console, you might.
As a launch title?
Yeah.
You know, what's going to move units off the shelves that's not Mario Kart, a new Mario, which we're getting at the end of the year. We're getting Wonder already.
Yep.
Again, another reason why I think backwards compatibility is going to be a huge thing, because like,
if it's not, they're going to have a hard time.
They're launching Christmas bundles that are Mario Kart themed and Animal Crossing themed, and what a better way to usher in new hardware than to have all of these games already for you.
Wind Waker HD that isn't trapped on Wii U, that would be good too.
Oh, see, there, you know, that, so like maybe Zelda is the dedicated Ravenous fan base thing.
That might be it.
Like, and that's why we're not seeing anything. But it's so weird that they would do something back to back like that. Although we do have at least a year before we even see this hardware, I'm sure. Because if they do what they did with the Switch, it's going to be like, yo, here's our new hardware, pre-order it now, it's out in 3 months.
Yeah.
So that's how the Switch happened.
Tears of the Kingdom did just come out this year.
Yep.
I'm going to adjust Mario Maker 3 first. Mario Maker 3 doesn't have a huge fan. They have a very dedicated community.
Yeah.
And they have a very dedicated fan base. But it is not it's not ginormous. That's kind of why I think Tears of the Kingdom, and again, this is why I think that the success out the gate of this console entirely rests on backwards compatibility. Because when people play Tears of the Kingdom, the biggest thing that I heard was complaining was the Switch just wasn't powerful enough to run it. It was a beautiful game. It was great, but the Switch just chugged.
Yeah.
Right? It was the limit of what the Switch was capable of. This is an older console, and
they've maximized its potential, absolutely.
And it was done, and so that's this. So I think that it saves them some headache in having to have a bunch of like killer launch titles right at the launch of the new console, right? Because they've got a lot of really good titles for the Switch, and if it's backwards compatible and it runs better, I think people are going to be happy.
You just need one. You need one or two big things, big flagship things that people can sink their teeth into to show off the power of this new hardware, if that's the direction you're going. And then, yeah, if you've got that backwards compatibility, you can rest on your laurels for a little bit while some games are developed, and you've got this whole catalog for people to explore.
Well, and then the other thing that you said a little while ago, and now it keeps popping back into my head, is you kept saying that in the leaks they're saying this thing could run the Final Fantasy VII Remake, right? Now, famously, Square, before it was Square Enix, it was Squaresoft. Squaresoft had a super tight relationship with Nintendo, all the way through the first 6 Final Fantasies, right? Yep. And then when Nintendo, and if you haven't read the articles on this, there's a bunch of stuff out there on the internet. It was the Sony and Nintendo breakup, right? Because the PlayStation was supposed to be a Nintendo peripheral until Nintendo backed out of the deal, right? And that was when Nintendo decided to stay with cartridges for the 64 and PlayStation, Sony was like, no, we're doing the CDs. That was when they broke up with Nintendo and haven't really been back.
Yeah.
Right? And I am certain that there is factions within Nintendo that would love to get Final Fantasy back on Nintendo.
Oh, I'm sure there's tons of people that would love it also from a community side.
A Chrono Trigger remake, like a true... Like what they did with Final Fantasy VII,
yeah.
Right? Could we get a Chrono Trigger, like a full-blown remake of Chrono Trigger? Like, I would buy that in a heartbeat, right?
Yeah, and like when we're talking about hardware, Saban does make a good point. People bought the Switch version, and then played it on emulator, so they could get that sweet 60 frames. And since you have the copy, feel free. Mario Odyssey 2, I don't know. You know, that does make me wonder.
There
Mario
would be
is good.
a Mario game on this new console for sure.
Yeah, and we're probably gonna get, like Salem was saying, Ultimate probably will make its way over. I'd be surprised if they don't continue to milk that, especially with that Nintendo online stuff where you get all the free courses.
Yep.
Star Fox, that's an interesting one. Star Fox, Tomodachi Express brings up Star Fox, and like, so to answer your previous question, did they make a Mario Galaxy recently? No, but they did make a new Luigi's Mansion, and it was pretty well received. Star Fox to me doesn't. I don't know if Star Fox hits the same way as a title the way that it used to for Nintendo. It doesn't carry any weight when somebody's like, "Oh, Star Fox." It doesn't hit nostalgia points for me.
And the thing is I think that there's a group of people who are nostalgic for Star Fox, right? And the problem is that they basically abandoned that IP
Because there's so many
after
fly
the
around
64
in
era.
space. Because it would need to turn into something else
Yeah.
besides what it was. But not improbable. Do I expect that to be a thing they'd lead with? Probably not.
Probably not.
Crystal Chronicles.
Again, I would love to see, because in my
Yeah.
opinion, some of the best Square Enix games were on the Super Nintendo, right? Chrono Trigger is a classic, right? I mean, it is an absolute classic. I love Chrono Trigger.
Ishantal, see you later night.
Yep. You know, there were some really good Final Fantasy games on the Super Nintendo. I would love to see that kind of come back together. The other thing that we haven't touched on yet, and this also came out in the rumors, a camera.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, right? If there's no reason they couldn't.
There's no reason they couldn't, but I was like, why would they do it?
Yeah, and that's my thought is like even the Switch, right? Like the online stuff was not really much of their focus out of the gate. They had a web browser that was hidden. You had to like go and dig and find it, and it was very limited. So like Nintendo's not really been big about that sort of online all the time connection in the same way that I think people are kind of used to in this day and age. So is that something that would change for them? You know, you got to wonder like, would a camera be a thing that they'd want? Would they want this to be more like you carry it everywhere, you take pictures with it, you do your internet stuff with it, you post on Instagram with it? Like, is that something that you see Nintendo going towards?
So here's my theory. This is the only theory I have on this.
Print out my pictures at Blockbusters again, yes. Or just pick up the little printer for your Game Boy.
I love that thing. It was like basically a receipt printer. Here's the only thing I can think of, right? Everybody, PlayStation, Meta, they're all going towards VR, right? What about, and one of the things that made Pokemon Go successful was the augmented reality aspect of it. The fact that it used your phone's camera and you could, get pictures of Pokemon sitting on top of something. Could they be doing an augmented reality type system?
Absolutely. I could definitely see Nintendo doing something like that.
Which I think would be more in their line than virtual reality.
Well, and let me double check this specifically, but last year or the year before, they filed a VR patent.
Yeah, while you're checking that,
yeah.
aren't they really hard on streamers playing their games? They used to be really bad about it. Nintendo used to copyright strike basically everybody. They've gotten better.
They have a bad relationship with the fighting game community because the fighting game community was a little bullish, and I have thoughts and opinions on that. I think Nintendo did the right thing there, but they also have a weird relationship with the Mario Maker community because they struck and took down all of Grand Pooh Bear's videos at some point. So like their relationship with their creator community is really weird.
And they had this, like, they tried to stand up the Nintendo Creator Program way back in 15 or 16, I think. And that went over like a lead balloon.
Yeah.
Especially with the cut that they wanted.
So real quick, jumping back to the VR thing just for a second. November 15th, 2022, Nintendo did file a patent for a VR device setup. It didn't really say what it was going to connect to, just the fact that they filed it last year. So the thoughts of it having a camera or any sort of stuff like that isn't that too far-fetched, especially if it is going to have VR
Or augmented
potential.
reality.
Yeah, because like honestly, like VR would literally be just slapping. Like you could technically do VR by slapping the Switch, splitting the screen, running the image. The Switch is obviously not powerful enough to do that, but like that's what a lot of VR is, just split an image on the screen. So I think there is some potential there, and having a camera on there wouldn't be too far fetched if that is the angle that they're aiming for.
Yeah. Pokemon Go-ish Pokemon game. I could see Nintendo doing something like that. With as popular as Go was, and still is actually for Niantic, I could for sure see them trying to do, like as an add-on or an additional activity or side quests, a Pokemon Go-ish, you know, like AR kind of game on a new console if they've got the printer or the camera to do it. The Google Cardboard route. No, I don't think they're going to go that way. Just stick it in your face. It's fine. Yeah, that was weird when they did that. I don't know. I'm super fascinated to see what Nintendo comes out with. All these leaks kind of coming faster. I think that, it does. And I've said this on the show a bunch of times. Guys, go listen to investor calls. You want to know what's really going on with some of these game companies and the places where they will let stuff slip and things like that. Go listen to their investor calls. When they're like, oh, okay, this is our thing, to make their investors chill out, they will let some cool stuff slip.
Actually, so real quick on that, Nintendo Labo did do a VR kit. So I don't know if you're Nintendo with the
I remember the Labo.
Familiar with the Labo, but like they literally did one, and it's funny as Salen is saying in this shot. Real quick, I'll just point it at the camera. The person is, in fact, just wearing
the Labo
the cardboard on their head.
Oh my God. It's going to be an interesting year for Nintendo. It's going to be a really interesting year for Nintendo. I am looking forward to seeing what this new console brings. Because they've kind of been one for one, like one good, one bad since the year 2000. Right?
As you know, I am all for it as long as it is so if Nintendo steps into the current gen, race that we're in right now, and is in league with the PlayStations and the Xboxes, maybe you can't do 120 frames or whatever. Who cares? But if they can play current gen games as good as 60 frames, like an Xbox Series S or X, then I think they are in the running, and it becomes a very different conversation about Nintendo, because Nintendo traditionally has put out, as we all know, fairly last-gen hardware when new-gen stuff is coming out.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, their strategy for the last 23 years, and Nintendo has said this publicly, like, we don't want to compete with Sony and Xbox. We're doing our own thing.
Yeah.
Right? Sony and Xbox can have that side of the market. We don't care, right? And it's served them, that strategy has served them well.
Which is why I think, like, even if they, like, I don't think they would try to directly compete, but, like, just people, the groundswell of them having a powerful console, a air quotes powerful console out there versus kind of what we're dealing with like the Switch right now. Switch is a fantastic piece of hardware. The OLED is a fantastic piece of hardware. But being able to put a little more juice behind that, and again, playing something like a Final Fantasy remake, that tells me that so many things could be possible at that point. So I'm excited to see what they do, where that goes, but we could talk about leaks for forever.
For days. Well, let us know what you think down in the comments. I'm super excited to see what happens. This next year is going to be really interesting.